At 0542 hours on March 3rd, 1945, a B-25 Mitchell bomber sat cold and silent on a coral airstrip in the northern Marianas. The sun had not yet breached the horizon. The air was heavy with the scent of high-octane fuel, sea salt, and damp dust. The war in the Pacific was grinding toward its final, brutal months. Yet for the 9 men assigned to this aircraft, the day had already unraveled. Their left engine refused to hold fuel pressure. Every attempt to prime, start, and run the engine above idle resulted in the pressure gauge dropping to 0 before the engine choked and quit. Under normal circumstances, this mechanical failure would dictate a delayed takeoff. But today, a delay meant missing the strike formation and failing to assemble offshore. To miss the formation meant flying alone over the vast, open ocean, straight into hostile Japanese airspace without protection. It was a suicide run, and every man on the crew knew it. Technical Sergeant Miller, the crew chief, wore the evidence of his struggle. Grease stained his shirt, coral dust coated his boots, and 2 hours of sheer frustration burned behind his eyes. He had methodically replaced one gasket, then a second, and finally dismantled and checked the fuel pump screen. Nothing worked. The engine continued to starve, cough, and die. Across the runway, under the watchful eyes of armed guards, a detail of Japanese prisoners swept the coral dust into piles. Some of these prisoners were barely more than boys, while others wore faces that seemed older than the war itself. Most kept their heads low, avoiding eye contact. Only one did not. He was a thin man with square shoulders and a quiet, intense stare. His name was Masaru Sato, 31 years old, formerly a mechanic for the Imperial Navy. Before the world caught fire, he had repaired fishing boat engines in Kagoshima. By all regulations, he should not have been anywhere near American combat aircraft. His assignment was simply to sweep dust, yet he watched the bomber's engine with a focus his captors did not understand. He recognized a sound that the Americans were missing. When the B-25 sputtered and died yet again, Sato flinched the precise moment the RPMs dipped. He mouthed a single word to himself, barely a whisper. Fuel leak. The guard immediately nudged him with the butt of a rifle, ordering him to keep sweeping. Back at the bomber, Miller dropped his wrench in defeat and wiped the stinging sweat from his eyes. "Damn thing is going to cost us this mission," he muttered. The pilot, Lieutenant Henry Collins, paced anxiously behind him. "We have 15 minutes, Collins said, his voice tight. "The formation leaves with or without us." Miller shook his head slowly. "Sir, something is bleeding pressure. We are chasing ghosts." They attempted another start. The engine sputtered and died. Collins looked at the rising light on the horizon and exhaled sharply through his teeth. "We fly today," he declared, "or we go home with nothing to show but a busted engine." The guard line began to march the prisoners toward the supply shack. As the column passed the B-25, Sato slowed his pace just enough to glance at the engine one last time. He spotted a faint glimmer on the lower cowling fuel, dripping in the wrong direction. He stopped walking. The guard shoved him forward. "Move." Sato bowed his head respectfully, but he raised one finger toward the engine nacelle. "Leak," he said quietly. "Leak. Lower fitting." The guard frowned deeply. "English only," he barked. But Lieutenant Collins had heard him. He turned sharply. "You," Collins said, pointing. "You said something." Sato hesitated, then nodded once. "Leak. Fitting?" he repeated, selecting each word with great care. The guard shook his head dismissively. "He's a prisoner, sir. Probably messing with you." But Miller stepped closer, wiping his hands on a rag. "Where?" he asked. Sato tapped the air, shaping the outline of an invisible pipe with his fingers, then angled his hand downward. Lower feed. Little crack. Pressure go out. Miller stared at him. You're a mechanic. Sato nodded again. Imperial Navy engines. The guard placed a hand on Sato's shoulder. He is not authorized. Collins cut him off. If he knows something, I want to hear it. The guard looked uneasy, but stepped back. Miller climbed under the nacelle with a flashlight, following the specific angle Sato had indicated. He froze. There was a quarter-inch hairline split on the auxiliary feed fitting. It was so small it was nearly invisible. Yet under high draw, the fuel leaked out instead of flowing to the engine. Miller cursed under his breath. Well, I'll be damned, he whispered. He's right. Collins knelt beside him. How bad? Miller, exhale. Bad enough that you can't pressure test this line without a proper cap, and we don't have a spare fitting anywhere on this island. Sato watched them, standing perfectly still, hands at his sides. Miller emerged from under the nacelle. We need a fix, he said quietly. A real one. Collins looked toward the prisoners. There were pages of regulations forbidding a POW near a U.S. combat aircraft, but time had run out. Sato stepped forward without being asked. Can fix, he said. The guard stiffened. No, he said. Absolutely not. But Collins raised a hand to silence him. What do you need? He asked Sato. Sato considered the engine, then tapped 2 fingers together. Soft metal, thin, and wire. Miller blinked. A patch? Sato shook his head. Shim, he said. Inside fitting, tight. Hold pressure from 1 mission. Collins asked. How do you know it will last? Sato's eyes lowered. Don't know, he said. But engines start. You fly. That was the only promise he made. Collins and Miller exchanged a desperate look. Miller sighed. Sir, we don't have another option. Collins nodded. Do it. The guard protested again, but Collins cut him off with a sharp order. The guard stepped back, his jaw clenched. Sato removed his cap, set it down neatly, and walked toward the engine, with the quiet confidence of a man returning to a trade he never expected to practice again. He did not rush. He did not tremble. He simply knelt like a man returning to work. Miller handed him a small strip of brass from a broken radio bracket and a length of safety wire. Sato shaped the brass with a file, working it thinner and thinner until it flexed between his fingers. Then he rolled it into a tight spiral, a handmade internal shim. He tapped it lightly, listening to the pitch, ensuring it was even. The guard watched with deep unease. You sure he's not sabotaging something? He muttered. Miller did not answer. Sato slid the shim inside the cracked fitting, twisted it until it locked, and then wrapped the exterior with safety wire in a tight, almost perfect pattern. His hands moved with calm precision. Finally, he stepped back. Try, he said. Miller primed the engine. Collins hit the starter. The B-25 coughed once, then twice, before roaring awake. Miller grabbed the pressure gauge. It was steady. It was holding. It was not dropping. Collins stared at it. Is it? Miller nodded, almost laughing in disbelief. It's holding. It is actually holding. The crew nearby let out a breath they had been holding for 20 minutes. Even the guard looked relieved. Collins walked toward Sato. You saved our mission, he said quietly, but Sato shook his head. No, he said. Engines save itself. I only help. The formation was already taxiing. Collins climbed into the cockpit, and the crew scrambled aboard. As the bomber rolled toward the runway, Sato stood at attention, hands clasped behind his back, watching silently. The guard whispered almost grudgingly, Never thought I'd say this, but thank you. Sato did not answer. He only bowed his head. When Collins returned hours later, the bomber's crew was exhausted, but alive. They had flown their mission. They had taken fire, and the left engine had carried them the entire way. Miller checked the fitting the moment the aircraft rolled back in. The shim held. The pressure stayed stable. Sato's repair had survived an entire combat run. But Sato was no longer at the airstrip. He had been transferred that morning to a different work detail. Collins found the guard from earlier. "Where is the mechanic?" he asked. The guard cleared his throat. "Transported," he said. "New camp," Collins frowned. "Can we send something to him? A note?" The guard shook his head. "Not allowed, sir." A month later, however, Collins received a folded piece of paper from the camp adjutant. There was no envelope, no formal stamp, just a single sheet. It was written in careful English. "Thank you for trusting me. I fix engines my whole life. This was first time I fix for peace." There was no name, no signature, but Collins knew exactly who had written it. After the war, when prisoners were repatriated, Sato returned to a Japan lying in ruins. His workshop had been crushed, his town half burned. He rebuilt engines for fishing boats along the harbor, earning his meals one repair at a time. Customers sometimes asked him where he learned to fix the newer American engines. Sato always gave the same small answer: from a plane that needed to fly. In 1957, a letter arrived at his shop. The paper was old, the ink fading. It was from Collins. He had tracked Sato down through a Red Cross list. The letter was short. "I never forgot the morning you saved us. I hope the years have been kind to you." Sato placed the letter in a wooden box beside a single strip of brass, the leftover piece of the shim he had cut that morning. He kept it for the rest of his life. If you walk the old airstrip today, there is nothing left but coral, wind, and scattered rust. But some veterans say that if you listen closely on quiet mornings, you can still hear the steady hum of a B-25 climbing into the March sky, held together by a piece of brass, a strip of wire, and the hands of a man who should have been an enemy, but chose instead to repair what was broken.